Good morning and thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to address you for many, many reasons. Haifa University is very close to my heart. My family has been involved with that university. I have colleagues here, and I was honored to be invited here by colleagues like Ami Ayalon and others who I will be seeing later today. I will want to share with you an overview of Israel's strategic agenda and to discuss what are the uppermost issues on our agenda and how they should be addressed and how they are viewed by Israelis. I will do so, however, not in any academic capacity, because an academic I am not. Most of my formative years, in fact, most of my professional life has been in the intelligence community, and more than 25 years I served with the Israeli Mossad, and in that capacity I had the pleasure of working with the intelligence communities of the countries represented here, because at various times I was in charge of our American cooperation and at other times European, and I tried to resolve the transatlantic differences between them. One way, by the way, of trying to annoy our British colleagues was to praise the Americans, which we did, with gusto in the good old days of the Cold War. But the reason I'm saying that is because the spirit with which I will talk to you is the spirit of an intelligence officer. That is to say, to tell things how they are. Whether they're pleasing or not is immaterial. Whether optimism or pessimism is not a function. You're judged by the veracity of your saying and by the accuracy of your saying and the plausibility of your predicting to the extent that you're speculating about the imponderables. But it is this spirit of candor and directness that I'll address the issues. It may ruin your appetite for the morning, I apologize in advance, but that's the cost of saying things as they are. My only excuse for that would be that academics too presumably should be telling the truth. So it is in this common pursuit of the truth that I will be addressing the issues. And with that introductory comment, I'll launch right away into the issue. It's been said that I chair this body called the Grand Strategy Forum. That's a bombastic title, but it does suggest that we try to look at the things from very high above, from the highest strategic perspective a nation can look at its own position internally and externally. And in so doing, the we are Israelis. We do not have any special institutional affiliation. We are defined by our membership, and the membership is of Israelis who have accomplished things in their life. The reason being that when you devise strategies, you have to do it based on also experience and also the legitimacy of your observations when you talk to those presumably in charge is so much greater if you can say, I've done things like that and not just shuffling papers. So inevitably the group would resemble what you often would encounter as a group of elders, have-beens, top CEOs, former university presidents, former senior officials, former senior diplomats, former admirals and generals, and scientists, but some also practicing and so forth. That's the group. There are people from the University of Haifa, faculty who are involved. There is also a friend, Mrs. Stockman, who's here, who is a friend of that project. But that project extends beyond the University of Haifa. The Technion is involved, and all other think tanks and universities in Israel, Hebrew University, Weizmann Institute, Beersheba. We have Bedouins from the University of Beersheba, but they have also non-Bedouins faculty. And it's a powerful group, and it is the reflections and deliberations of that group that I will be sharing with you. The group first convened in the summer of 2013, and just to sound the right and politically correct note, the day was Jabotinsky Day, but the venue was Ben Gurion's private residence in Tel Aviv. So it was a bipartisan, modest, unassuming, unpretentious location. There were 20 people in attendance, some chairmen of the Supreme Court, senior university people, business executives, military, and so forth. And there were two questions addressed. Is Israel being confronted by risks and problems which are of the scope that could put in jeopardy the very existence of Israel as it was conceived and construed? That is to say, are we facing what sometimes loosely is defined as existential threats? And if there are such, which are they? And the second was, is there any way we can provide strategies and responses to overcome such problems in an integrated way, because the sense in the room at the time was a profound crisis. The summer of 2013 was a moment in which many people, many Israelis, without they wouldn't talk and possibly not always share that with others, but in their own hearts were very concerned. It is what brought us together, concerned about the viability and the future of Israel. I think that deep in his own heart, there isn't a serious Israeli who does not have questions, and that comes as a result of two combinations. One, our legacy, an historic legacy. We are the only nation in the world which defines its history by its low points rather than high points. You must have noticed that. It's always the first destruction, the second destruction, and then comes the Holocaust, as if there was nothing in between. All other nations celebrate their high points. We don't talk about the high points. We did have, but it is the low points, the traumatic of our history, which register. But then there was another thing which was happening that summer. There was a sense of loss of direction, of loss of a sense of purpose, national purpose. It was caused by much of what was happening in the world, the turbulence in the world, the things happening in the Middle East, but also internally. There was a sense of disorientation, weaknesses, leadership failure, possibly incompetence, absence of unity or at least commonality in addressing the main challenges, an ability that we did have in the past, although we were divided, but there was at least a mainstream that led the way. All this was permeating in the air, and it is with this sense of melancholy and concern that a group of 20 convened at Ben Gurion's residence. And that resulted in a day-long debate in which it became very clear that there is such a list of almost 10 problems of the scale and magnitude that could put in jeopardy Israel's future. And then that the response was, yes, we should be thinking about it because our leaders are not. And I would challenge you to show me one statement coming from our leadership which genuinely takes the bull by the horns and address those issues seriously. I'm not saying rhetorically or argumentatively, but seriously. How does one resolve and overcome existing problems? Now, it is very interesting that the list provided, and this is not mathematical, you could probably shorten it, but people spoke out of position. For example, the nuclear scientist did not talk to nuclear proliferation as being the most difficult one. They thought that the rule of law and the unraveling of some of our legal structures and disciplines was most threatening. Almost everybody recognized the threats beyond his own sphere of responsibility, but that's an interesting sociological observation. But let me walk with you on some of those trends. and then you will see what the problem is. The first one had to do with the changing role of the United States globally. You see, the Israeli alliance with the United States is such, and someone who's been involved in it in all its chapters, I cannot even tell you, but we've been very, very close throughout last generation and so forth. And that alliance is a major component of the fabric of Israel's national security. When you add up the military to the diplomatic, to the economic, to the cultural, to the social, to the Jewish, to everything, it is almost, it's part of our security, inseparably so. Now, if anything happens to the United States, if the United States, as a result of its own volition, decides to pivot elsewhere or to reduce its involvement, it immediately impacts on our national security. And since such trends have been in evidence, although we know that they are possibly reversible, no one assumes simplistically that things are as they are. We know America, and we know America is also debating its own future course. But the fact still remains that there's been a noticeable change, one which had the effect of essentially diluting to some extent the degree to which we could look up to the US as a major ally in support of us to the extent that we may need it. Europe, same story but differently. Europe that plays such a large role in Jewish history, and our connection to Europe, you may not be realizing that, but we've always looked up to certain European countries as our ex-allies. The first superpower with which we've tied our fate was Britain. We fought the British to get them out, but we fought under the British flag in the Second World War, and we benefited enormously from the British mandate here. And even after the war, for 20 years, as many people would attest here, when America was having an arms embargo on Israel, and we were not receiving even one rifle legally from the United States, it was Britain that was supplying us with submarines, with tanks, and had we wanted aircraft. So let's not belittle that connection, which still exists. And then, of course, there was France. That is the honeymoon that we all loved, which led throughout the 50s and 60s. It was a major ally. We went to war with Britain and France against the wishes of the United States at the time. That is the test of an alliance. So the French were around, and the French did help us with many, many things. When I served here in Haifa in a radar station, it was a French-built radar station. That's what we had here on top of the mountain. So the French gave us a great deal of diplomatic, military, scientific, missile technology, nuclear technology. That was quite an alliance. Now the interesting thing is that Europe today has not been replaced by America in many ways. America has taken the primary role in the last 40 years, and that has become the pillar, the cornerstone of our security. But France and Britain are allies of the United States. That is essentially the Atlantic community, and we had also bilateral connections with key European countries. In that context, which was an interesting construct, and there was more body to it than people know. So anything happening to Europe and other countries of Europe was also bound to impact on Israel. And the fact remains, as you all know, that Europe is going through a period in which its international involvement is not very high from a defense point of view, but it does take positions. Then when it does take positions, some of it is critical of Israel and its conduct of its own affairs, the Palestinian issue primarily, but Europe remains a major trading partner, a major scientific partner, something very important to be observed here. So if anything was happening to Europe, if Europe was shrinking, that too is a negative from our point of view, irrespective of the way you look at it. The third point, however, is that, and that is something structural you have to realize, And that was true from the very beginning. Israel was always numerically inferior in the Middle East. We were fewer. We had less territory, less population, less number of states. And the only way we could offset our numerical, quantitative inferiority is by cultivating our qualitative superiorities or economic or other advantages. That was the crux of the matter. And that was the genius of Chaim Weizmann and Ben-Gurion. People remember Ben-Gurion, but Chaim Weizmann had much to do with it. That from day one, science and technology and education were defined, and I'm saying that because we are where we are, were considered vital to Israel's future. And as a result, that has become genuinely the case. That is to say, you cannot explain the dynamism of much of the Israeli economy, or even the prowess of the Israeli military, without noticing that it's got to do much with technological and scientific advantages. It's not, I'm afraid to say, our generalship that decided the battles, not even the courage of our troops, which were all in evidence. Often it had been technology. Just look at Iron Dome in the last round. But that's been around for a long time. Now, what's the bad news? The bad news is that there has been an erosion in our qualitative advantage. The gap, it's always the gap that has to be minded. The gap between us and competitors, the gap between us and rivals and adversaries has been narrowing. There are more scientific papers now produced by Iranians than by Israelis. And they're damn good. So, to the extent that that was a pillar of our security, to see the erosion of that gap is a cause for concern. The fourth one is very related to the third one. I'm afraid, and I regret to say, but this is an exercise also in self-criticism. The quality of our higher education, and in fact even the quality of our basic education, has been declining. We can see that by all the objective tests. Even in numbers, you must have seen the headline in the last few days about the declining numbers of high school students who go and get a large amount of preparation in sciences and mathematics. We don't have enough graduates. We have only 2/3 of the manpower we need by the various, by the market. And the standards, let us not flatter ourselves, the standards are declining. You look at the rankings, you look at university rankings, you look at where we are relative to other places, and we are not heartened by that. Certainly, we are declining relative to where we were. The fact that we are now scoring a few prizes, these are the delayed rewards for investment made 20, 30 years ago. But we know what's happening, and these are disturbing news. The fifth point, of course, is the only one which is obvious, but it has to be noted, and again, it's not unrelated. Strategically speaking, and militarily speaking, we have benefited a great deal from the fact that there has been a perception. I will not talk in any obvious way. Here I'm talking elliptically because of natural inhibitions, that Israel has been enjoying a nuclear monopoly in the Middle East. That is the perception, and it served us well. Our posture has been one of ambiguity, but the other side somehow believes that they know what there is, and they give us credit to have pretty formidable nuclear capability. But with the advent of Iran, we are in the process of possibly losing that perception. I'm not talking about the facts and realities, but the monopoly may evaporate. And as all of you know, to have a monopoly is very good. Not to have one is very bad. Because that brings into the matter competition. But competition in many walks of life is very good. Not in this business. We do not like the competition. And I will not comment on that any further, although you can realize that this has been my field of work 90% of my time in the last 10 or 20 years. I think that was my main preoccupation, the so-called euphemistically the strategic domain. There too, I don't know if you saw the interview with President Obama yesterday. I met him a couple of times. I tend to think relatively highly of him as a mind. He gave a very solid performance, extremely well calibrated, wise. He was good, very, very good. But the policy that came out of it was very disturbing to us, because essentially he was conveying a policy which was reconciling itself to the possibility that Iran will become nuclear in the long-term future, and that America will not use force to prevent that. At most, if the Iranians will cheat, then sanctions will be snapped back. Well, that's a defeatist position. I'm equally critical of my own country position on that, so don't think that I'm doing a half job by saying that I wish the policy would have been more effective. And effectiveness is the test, not the flamboyance, not the rhetoric. Effectiveness questions, are they getting any closer? And the answer is yes. They have already positioned as a threshold nuclear state, and that is geopolitically very destabilizing. So that's the fifth point. Now we're getting into other weaknesses which may not be exogenous to Israel or external, that they are internal, but to the extent that they are serious, they do strain the fabric of our national existence. And in that sense, they could be equally threatening to things that come from the outside, some of these. You know, at Davos, the elders of the world have declared that economic inequalities and income inequalities and the like are the #1 most serious threat, and in many ways it may be the case. But in Israel we have a particularly problematic degree of inequality, which is worse in other countries, and it does affect our societies in certain specific ways which strain our cohesion and our solidarity to stages in which it could become precarious. So it is not because of the distributional injustices of the income inequality or wealth inequality what we do about it, but because of the political effect it may have on the local order, on the degree of commonness that we need so much if we want to perform effectively as a nation. That is getting worse, and that is a problem. The next one has got to do with something I can attest to, and those of you who have worked with our executive branch is simply becoming more and more incompetent in terms of performance. Now again, this is not a typically Jewish self-criticism or self-flagellation, because I don't think it was, it was Davos as well, but also the Munich Security Conference that spoke very openly about what they called the incompetence of incumbents, and that was with the exception of Madame Angela Merkel, whom we all admire enormously, but she's the exception rather than the rule. But when we look around, we are not very, very impressed by the competence of leaders both in democratic and in non-democratic countries, and that becomes a problem. Not only becomes a problem, but the act of governance is becoming much more difficult. We all realize that because of technology and the digital revolution and all these things that multiply dynamics and surprises and all those words of disruptive and so forth, they also complicate the managerial function of running a state. That is true. But rather than having more competent leaders who can master the ability to operate under such conditions, we get all kind of, in this country too. We just had the Minister of Finance who was a high school dropout before the current one. What does this indicate about the value of universities? What are universities for if we elect voluntarily Minister of Finance It doesn't have a matriculation thing. I mean, you can joke, but certain jokes at one point become very, very serious. But that is the case. So incompetence becomes a problem, and in Israel we have that manifestation too. We know that. So what's the point of having good policies if the executive branch does not get to a very high degree of implementation? The ratio is very, very sorry. We have not had civil service reform now for more than a generation. We're lagging behind many countries in terms of the use of better governance techniques, and what is also introducing notions of dysfunctionalities into the performance of our executive branch is I don't know to what extent you've looked into the act of distributing the portfolios as if it was a party that you could give to nobodies some of the most taxing portfolios. And worst of all, and the worst sin of all, in my eyes, is that the field of national security, some of the critical issues have been so cavalierly given, under the guise, strategic affairs, you do that moonlighting, or you're free from your other responsibilities, and dealing with Americans, it was given to another minister, and dealing with Jerusalem to another minister, and dealing with strategic affairs to another one, and you know who does intelligence? The Minister of Transportation. I mean, what do you make of that? I don't know. I mean, if it weren't funny, if it weren't sad, it is so funny. But this shows you, if we want to use academic words, that's the politicization of our government, and it gets it. This is the spoil system, and you know what? It spoils the system. And that's a problem which complicates the issue of incompetence, and that's a major problem. Then going back to 2 or 3 other areas, we have an unbalanced economy, which when you look at the long-term demographic figures, you see that there are so many parts of the labor force which are not active in the labor force, and that will get worse over time, particularly for the ultra-Orthodox sector, the Arab sector. So it is not a balanced labor, and we suffer from low productivity as a consequence. There are many other typical Israeli things, but as a result of that, there's a high degree of inefficiencies, and that's a trouble. And I conclude with 2 other areas in which bad omens have been showing with clear, and they relate to our national security. One is the observable reduction in our legitimacy. This process in which the other side is trying to reduce our legitimacy by doing what is referred to as the delegitimization of Israel, which to my mind is a broader effort to essentially affect Israel through a battle of attrition that would cause damage legally, politically, diplomatically, scientifically, where it hurts, precisely at a time when we need to flex our scientific and academic muscles. Those boycotts are hurting very badly, as you may have heard, and Amos, I think, was in that meeting with the president of Israel, alerting the president to what this may do to our academic and high-level education. So, but the noticeable reduction in our legitimacy, our right to exist as a Jewish nation, is well documented in public opinion, so they are succeeding our adversaries. They are doing better. And one must respect one's adversaries. What counts are the results. Again, not self-flattery and not claim that we are right. It's not, in this world, being right is half the job. You also have to be successful. And finally, the most disappointing of all is that, and we are not admitting that too easily, but even the decisiveness of our military has not been demonstrable or demonstrated in the last skirmishes. We have a glorious military machine. We have the most committed troops. We have highly motivated and professional generals. But when it comes to even tactical local skirmishes, results are always at best mixed. Now, what is it? We are told that, the end has come and military forces can no longer decide issues. I wonder. So we have to take a very hard look into what is malfunctioning there, because we're spending a lot of money on that. If we don't get results, either we should get results and not spend money, but to do both is the worst of all worlds. So, as you saw, that was almost a litany of adverse trends, which demonstrate that all of them are life-threatening, in the sense that they could jeopardize Israel's existence either physically or as a socio-political construct. So, one of those French field marshals, I don't remember what the one, Foch, they all have similar names. One of them, when he was told on the First World War that he was completely encircled, so, when he asked his lieutenants, really, are we completely encircled from all directions? To which he said, yeah, unfortunately, sir, we are encircled. He said, okay, alors on attaque. No other alternative, no escape. You don't even need to choose. You can choose any time, alors on attaque. And by the way, that is, I think, the spirit with which we should approach the problem. One Israeli leader called the Ben Aaron once coined the most fabulous slogan for an inspiring call for action, because we can overcome the problems. I don't know how to translate that into English, but I'll say it in Hebrew. Oz letmura beterem puranut. Oz is let's have the guts. Tmura is transforming.
It was published in all the newspapers on the same day, and it's history.
So this is the spirit with which we have to approach the problem. Now, they are all, and that is what humbled us. We got up to be about 150 people strong. Many of them accomplished people that have been working, trying to devise strategies how to cope. Now, it doesn't mean that you have one single strategy with each. In fact, you have to have multiple strategies. But these strategies have to be real grand strategic in the sense that they have to be self-supporting, coherent, and not conflicting. So when you take too narrow a view, that's where you get gridlocked. So it did call for very difficult act of integration and look at the cross-cutting effects, and also employing all kinds of instruments that we know from experience stand a chance of cracking some of those problems, because some of them are very difficult by their very nature. They resemble what has been called by the mathematician Hilbert at the time the grand problems, unresolved problems that could be resolved if you concentrate, and this is what he proposed, the best minds, in an effort, knowing that if you're successful, the payoff will be worth the effort. So we did just that. And we have come with quite a number of directions, and we know the process of integrating them, but I'll tell you what they add up to. They add up to a strategy which is one of massive transformation. Leaving aside the structural and organizational transformation which are needed, which are many, the crux of the matter is that in this process we have to reverse the trend wherever possible. The clearly most promising area that would give us greater strength and resources is to reverse the declining trend in science and technology and education, because that's where we have the real capital. Our real capital is the human capital. and then the social capital. So by trying to rectify some of the social problems through a variety of means, fiscal and otherwise, but also by working in a concentrated way to essentially increase significantly our human resources, and that calls for massive educational redirection in the fields of R&D, and it's very, very detailed, and many of you have been involved in that. Believe me that we've done and tried to address the most serious bottlenecks and problems of financing and overcoming them by groups of people from industry and from the government and so forth, but that's where action is imperative. Now, to do that, we have, however, to obtain a better climate internationally, because the process now of boycotting Israel is certainly not helping. Now that clearly calls for moderating our policies on the Palestinian issue. The Palestinian issue is not an issue that should be looked at its own merit only. It should look also how it resonates and how it projects. And it is clearly, irrespective of whether you're in the center, left, or right, that it is in our national interest now for other reasons to have a more flexible, a more forthcoming, a more active, a more dynamic position on many of those issues. So that is also the message that is coming from there. Then we have to have a series of reforms, practically in every domain. In the social area, we have to do certain things because our policy machine is actually obsolete. Those of you with government experience wouldn't believe we've not had any administrative reform in Israel now for 40 years. It's really obsolete. Myself, the National Security Council that I formed and then headed, has been absent until it was formed. We managed our affairs without a National Security Council, and it shows. After all, our history is not exactly a series of brilliant successes. We've had our very, very serious faults, some of which, because of this kind of disarray and insufficient performance. But this is not complete. Just to show you again a sad joke, what is our recommendation for administrative and organizational reform in the area of diplomacy? We are proposing that Israel establishes a foreign office. You understand the point? You get the point. But it is a sad aspect. Our foreign office is a shadow of what a foreign office should look like. And at times, when you need to have a deployed force, professionally staffed and effective. And on top of that, we do not have a minister now because the Prime Minister has taken the portfolio. He has spare time, probably. He placed as deputy minister the most junior, a lovely lady, but she's completely out of her field. If she weren't a lovely young woman, she doesn't know a thing about the matter. And he fired the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's no way to run a professional system. And diplomacy is a professional thing. But we have to have a more serious review of our national security concept. Too many things are unhinged. And of course, the area in which I cannot talk about, but if indeed Iran is to become and to position itself as a threshold nuclear state, that calls also for some adaptations in our posture. And that's a very complicated thing and also a very costly thing. You've seen that we've just acquired submarines. Now, what are the submarines for? I can tell you again, I just hinted it. The policy that we've been following is a policy of hedging. That is to say, we put our premium on trying to prevent, but we couldn't gamble on the assured success of prevention, and therefore we had to have as a contingency plan also to prepare ourselves for the eventuality of a failure of prevention, and the default option is, of course, deterrence. Now, deterrence, you need submarines. So we had to work on all those tracks simultaneously and to do so judiciously, because you're not fulfilling one or the other. You're maneuvering with all of these. But that's a very tall order, but it also calls for a revised policy. Now, Zev, you'd be pleased to know that I've been a supporter of the underwater strength, but you won't believe the kind of opposition we face from any Air Force people here? From the Air Force. The best, they are by far, they're so good, but they're so wrong. So we have some serious debates. But speaking of maneuvering, maneuver should be our strategy. So now in the Middle East is changing. It is changing in ways that, as an intelligence officer, I can tell you, no one can tell because we're completely out of our wits. Everything that's happening is without precedent. We have nothing to fall back on. And we have to keep watch about all those dynamics and ISIS and all those. And you have, but the rule here is to be agile, to know your priorities. The priorities remain to protect those countries with which we have peace, which is Egypt, Jordan, and half the Palestinians. Let's not forget that. We've had agreements with them as well. Let us not do anything that would bring about the unraveling of the various peace that we've had. But we have to move beyond that. We have to protect Jordan. It may call for power projection. And we have to maneuver regionally in ways that are not necessarily monogamous, meaning we don't have to choose sides, Sunni, Shia. This is an old affliction of Israelis in the past. They always had to choose sides. You know, when there was in Lebanon, a war in Lebanon, we struck a deal with the Christians to the detriment of ignoring the Shiites. Who gained by that? We should practice the Japanese art of working with all sides. But you have to do that in a judicious way. And it is complicated. You have to know the space with which you can work. Certainly it calls for a more dynamic regional Israeli policy. That too. On the globe, what can we do? Well, I think that, you know, in our debates what to do about America, and they said, let's suppose hypothetically that America is on the decline. What are we to do? Search for substitutes? Are there any substitutes? Do we have a pivot east option? Is China or a great nation our partner? Or India? Maybe we have a Russian lover, honeymoon. Some of us speak Russian. Maybe we should fall back on our old African memories. Each one end, or maybe stay the course with Europe and America. If we stay the course with America and America is declining, will we sink with the American ship, or are we going to jump ship? And there was lively debate. We examined all the alternatives. We practiced the scenario system and the solarium system and all kind of funny things. And you know what the end result of the exercise was? That when you did all that, the ultimate conclusions were essentially we stick with the Atlantic alliances. We've been there, and it did not, even Europe should not be discounted, and certainly not America. Some of us had said, maybe we should help them. I asked that person, a very senior Israel, what do you propose? How can we help America? Should we fight in Afghanistan? We can hardly fix the Hamas in Gaza. You expect us to go into Afghanistan? He said, no, don't take my words like that. We can make a difference in the field of science, here and there. In our scientific cooperation, we're helping America in that sense. So you see, not only we are not about to jump ship, but we'll make the ship less sinkable. And that is the spirit, but that is the direction we may be going, which does not mean that it would be by neglecting the developments either in Asia, where our options are greater than just China or India, the others, Australia, Singapore, Korea, Japan. So we do have an Asian space to work on. We are not dismissing Russia, but they are not substitutes. At the end of the day, when you factor into the whole thing, even the value and history, we are still anchored in the West. And that will probably remain. So a strategy of hedging, yes. A strategy of diversification, yes. Because prudence is the order of the day at times of uncertainty. but does not mean that it would be we have to practice a chaotic strategy at the time that the world is acting chaotically. So I just shared with you some of the directions that are now being explored among serious Israelis who are already impacting on some of our policies, because a government has already been established and there is demand for some of those ideas. But this hardly resolves the issue. The problems remain. The tasks, they may be getting worse. They are serious. We should not take consolation in the pockets of excellence we have, because as we always remember, you know, chains are defined by the weakest links, not by the strongest links. And we have too many weaknesses that have to be corrected. And the challenges are enormous. In fact, we have been borrowing the term of grand challenges to indicate those that call for real concentration of effort, political will, resources, and the best of minds and will. And if I have to conclude by a tone of something I said I would avoid, pessimism or optimism, I'll say what I also believe to be the case. The problems are serious, and many, if unattended, many things that are detrimental might happen. So in that sense, one should not be foolhardy, and one has reason to be concerned. But if we'll be able to perform as we have in the past, not beyond levels that, and to get our act together in certain areas as we are capable, and make the changes necessary through political action, but also practical action by people in place, most of the problems can be overcome. In fact, all of them. None should really jeopardize Israel's security existentially. None. And in that sense, I'm an optimist. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Arad. Your insights into the real issues will
Yes, because we're having a summary discussion.
No, we don't have to ask him. Tell him that he will remain.
Yes, sir.
So they said, your issues into the real issues will give us plenty to think about today. But before you go, the university would like to give you this token of appreciation. I invite Professor Taber to come up and present it.
Sorry, I probably should give this to you this afternoon. But I'll give it to you now in the expectation. I understand it would be, what indeed is the schedule? Chairman, let me know what's going on. Esty, you're supposed to be giving panel discussion around 10:15. 10:15. We'll take 10 minutes for discussion. Come. First of all, thank you very, very much. This can go on the wall.
Thank you. Thank you for this. No more even question.
Uzi, your experience.
Thank you. I have no experience with taking photos.
Really?
It's something I avoided. But let me tell you one thing. There is a photo that I used to hang in my Mossad office throughout my professional life. One photo, two photos actually. One was the painting by Rembrandt of the prophet Jeremiah weeping over the fall of Jerusalem. And the message was to my colleagues, this is the business we're in, to prevent that happening again. The other thing was a fabricated photo of Groucho Marx with an inscription to Uzi, my fellow Marxist and analyst. Most Marxist and anarchist. And most people thought that this was a genuine dedication. I falsified it. What people believe. It's what people believe.
Perception is everything.
Okay, don't leave. We're going to have a few minutes of discussion. Almost.
Uzi, I wrote very carefully the list of challenges that you mentioned, and I think you know that in the end you touched the key success factor, which is leadership competency, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and then the question is what we are going to do with it. And the question is, do we have leaders that are more stupid than let's say 50 years ago, or more competence? I doubt that this is the case. But you know, it interests me because I find some similarities between, you know, the challenges, or, you know, not the challenges, because the university doesn't have the same challenges as the state of Israel, but the university is challenged. And the way of leadership competence, and why, you know, what are the deficiencies, how it should be corrected. You know, at least, you know, now you talked about the state. Is that, you know, that one thought that I thought about it, you know, the question is whether we have now less competent leaders than 50 years ago. It's also maybe connected that 50 years ago, when we have a survival, you know, challenge, it's easier, you know, to get consensus around, you know, what should be done than, you know, when you are not challenged for survival. But actually, you know, what is the solution for the leadership incompetence that you raised?
Well, of course, that is the question that we are all asking ourselves. No, the question is, are there people of a lesser caliber than of past generation? The answer, if you look at the totality, no. The number of Israelis who actually possess leadership qualities numbers in the tens of thousands, and you know them. They are all over the country in various fields. Some of them, people who are clearly have what it takes to be ministers, have executive capacity, have character, have demonstrable qualities, but they do not penetrate the political class. By the way, this is not an Israeli deficiency only. Look at America. I blame all the Americans. With a pool of talent as large as America, clearly those who reach the high positions in Washington are not the best that America can or shall fill. So it's a problem. In Israel, that problem is being made worse, and Ami could tell you here, by the political class putting barriers, deliberate barriers to entry, so as to perpetuate their position and not allow any, and they're doing that. By the way, I have the confessions of Shimon Peres. He confessed to me, under witness, how he did it. They did it all the time. So what we have to do in Israel is to break those barriers. I think that the political class today does not have a very enticing menu of leaders to offer, and that's deliberate. And I don't think that we have to leave that to them, to any aspiring journalist who just because he's been on the airwaves suddenly believes he has the remedies to the country. That's not another source. But I do think that we do have leadership class people, not with raw qualities, but also with demonstrable ability. We have to make a way in which they would assume position of responsibility quickly. That calls for some political action, complicated political action, but we should work on it. We missed an opportunity this time around, too sadly. That's your party, I mean.
Yeah, well, of course, first of all, it's not my part, but
I would say something about it. I think that I believe that you did not mention the crisis in our democratic concept. You mentioned it?
No, I didn't.
Okay. I'm saying it because it is more complicated. We are trying to look for leadership, and we are looking to our political leaders. And this is not the place in which we should find leadership. Unfortunately, and a short anecdote, it's, we were dealing with the Mossad. I remember when I was in the Shin Bet, we did everything in order to make sure that the Prime Minister will read our report first. Before the Mossad, the military intelligence, it was very important for us. We did everything. Colorful pages, too short as possible, double space, whatever. It did not help us. The first paper that every prime minister read, and I served 3 prime ministers and 4 defense ministers in 4 years. These are facts. The first paper that each of them read are the polls. Now we are laughing, but it's in a way every morning he is asking us people, where do you want me to lead you? So leaders became followers everywhere. This is the whole essence of democracy, and we do not understand it. Leadership is everywhere, and if we want to find it, it is within the civil society. What I got from your speech, and it was a great speech. You told us that you understand it, and you, with some friends who are not part of the political community, you understood that it is your responsibility to come up with a grand strategy. And this is a great idea that you presented here. You are not expecting our Prime Minister, you are not expecting any of our political leaders. And this is what I got from your presentation.
Thank you very much. We will adjourn in a moment.